So this is part 2 of a talk I gave exactly a month ago today, June 26th. And I was poking fun at myself about being called a Canadian nationalist. So I'm not going to go through all that again, but it was just a safe thing to talk about, because when you're in a group, you can talk about yourself. When other people call you that, it's a bit of a problem. So I left off where I had gone through what other people think Canadians are and what a nationalist is. And actually, I will never convince you that I'm not a Canadian nationalist. You'll have to find out for yourself. So if you've just tuned in, you'll think, oh, there's a Canadian nationalist at the Abbey. Why is Venerable Children having her living here? And then it goes from there. So come and find out for yourself. So as I mentioned last time, I'll just do this paragraph as a review to get us in the groove, to get me in the groove. When our mind's afflicted and we give someone a label, I'm not talking about this label, gong, right? I'm talking about an afflicted mind that, beaks out at someone. Then, in my experience, we create a wall between us and the person. They're immediately reduced to a snapshot, at least in my mind. I can see this person as an image. It's one moment in time, and then that snapshot can then inform all of my future encounters. And then I've stripped that person of their humanity. I forget their capacity to learn and grow. I'm not acknowledging that this is a person with thoughts and feelings and aspirations. I'm not remembering this is a person who wants happiness and doesn't want to suffer. And I'm ignoring the reality that this person has the capacity to become a fully awakened Buddha. So in talking about snapshots last time, I left off with this photo of my good friend Upeka. He's one of the Abbey kitties, and his name means equanimity. And he lives up to this name fairly well. But you might think right away, oh, that's a Buddhist kitty. He's not a Buddhist. He has a cat mind. He would, we hope he'll be a Buddhist in the future, and we tell him this every day to come back here as a monastic. But poor Upeka is trapped in this little body where he's a prisoner. I take him out every day for a walk. He's a prisoner to smells. And so we go out and we smell everything on the property. But he's not a Buddhist. Now, one day when I was deadheading petunias downstairs, my attention turned from him for a moment. We take the kitties out in leashes so that they stay safe and that so they don't kill. I turned my head for a second, and dear Upeka then had a mouse in his mouth. And I tried to shake the mouse out. I did everything I could for that little poor mouse. And I didn't succeed. So Upeka killed the mouse. Now, do I then give the label killer to Upeka? Well, in that moment, he was. But is he a killer in every moment? No. Can I forgive Upeka? Absolutely. He has a kitty mind. I don't think he even intended to do it. It's just such a habitual thing with a kitty mind that he pounces on anything that moves. The other day it was a snake. I was successful. He didn't kill the garter snake. So you have to be fast with these kitties on leashes. But to give Upeka the label killer and then just to hang on to that and solidify it, oh, here's my kitty, killer. It doesn't make sense, and it's the same for people as well. So during the forgiveness retreat that happened last weekend, in thinking about labels and about forgiveness and grudge holding that stops the forgiveness, I was reminded of a story that I heard back in 2006. I wasn't living here. I was in Alberta. And I was driving to a Tai Chi class, and I had this Canadian program called As It Happens. It's a program that happens every evening. And I would usually listen to it because they interview interesting people. And I will never forget this story ever. And fortunately this morning, I've been looking for this story for 14 years, and I found it in their archives section. And it's this amazing story about an American man. His name is Michael Berg. And let me just tell you a bit of the story here. So Michael Berg's son, Nick, was working in Iraq in, I guess it was 2004. And he was working there to repair communication towers. So I think this was a second trip back for Nick. I think it was probably lucrative work. And in an act that shocked the world, Nick had been abducted and beheaded. And his body was found May 8th in 2004 near a Baghdad highway overpass. Even more unthinkable, his killers posted a ghastly video on the internet. So his dad, Michael Berg, as you can imagine, was overcome, the whole family was overcome with heartbreaking grief. And you can imagine for a moment what Michael Berg might have called the man who murdered his son so brutally, and what his friends called that man. All kinds of labels. Then the person becomes solidified forever in that person's memory as, a murderer. As the story goes in this interview, in a while, Michael could see that his life was being ruined by his mental state of grief and probably other negative emotions. And he saw a flyer, I think, came to his mailbox from a university in the vicinity. It was the Immaculate University, which is a Roman Catholic university. And I think it was just a weekend course on forgiveness. He was actually looking through their catalog for an art course. But then he saw this course on forgiveness. And he said, a single word caught his eye, forgiveness. And the subtitle of the course was The Way to Love in a Wounded World. Berg knew in that moment that he had to take the class. Within the first 5 minutes of the class, he said, now remember, this is in the first 6 months of his grieving. He said, I began to find words to express things that up until that time had just caused turmoil. A little bit later on, he stood in front of an Oklahoma church as he continued his healing process and talking about the process of what he was going through. And he told the audience he didn't want vengeance. He did want the killers removed from society, jailed, hopefully. But many of his friends were heartsick and enraged, and they wanted the ultimate revenge. Michael Berg said he never did want that, not from the first minute of hearing about his son. And then part of him felt guilty every now and then. When he saw all of his friends rallying around and wanting revenge, he said he even felt disloyal or unpatriotic for feeling that he didn't want revenge. Some people were very moved by his acts of forgiveness, especially for the person who murdered his son. So now we'll fast forward a few months later, I think it was the next year, where CBC interviews Michael Berg. And the title of the story goes, No one expected Michael Berg to forgive the man believed to be responsible for Nicholas Berg. And the man that was responsible in the end was a person by the name of Amu Saab al-Zakawi. So as it happened, the US forces decided they would go and get this person because he had done some other murders as well. So they targeted him and they killed him. When the CBC reporter spoke to Berg about his son's killer, here's what he had to say. So the reporter asks him, what was your reaction when you heard that Zakawi had been killed? And Michael Berg said, my reaction was a human reaction of sadness at the death of any fellow human being. As John Donne said, any man's death diminishes man. And it is certainly true, al-Zakawi's was doubly tragic. It was tragic because he was a human being, and there are people who loved him, and there are people that are now suffering the same pain that my family and I have suffered. And it is tragic because he's a political figure and because his death will re-inflame the insurgency. And every time someone dies in Iraq, it creates a whole new group of insurgents. So then the reporter asked him, well, you know what? Some people might be surprised by your reaction. Did you always see Zakawi as a human being? Or did it take you some time for you to come to this point? And Michael Berg responds, I have to admit, it took a little bit of time. A little bit of time. Wow. I never once asked for revenge against him because I knew that that was wrong. I knew that my son would say that was wrong. But it took me a while. It took about a half a year before I came to the point where I could honestly say that I forgave him. Then the reporter said, when the brother of another hostage that al-Zarqawi was accused of killing said, "May he rot in hell," what do you say to him? And Michael Berg answered, I understand that man's pain. I understand that. But I think he's wrong. I think that when you ask for revenge, you actually justify the death of your loved one. If I say revenge is okay for al-Zarqawi, look at what he did to my son. Then can't Zarqawi's parents say, you ordered the death of my son, so we're entitled to revenge on you, and I will not ever justify revenge, because that would justify my son's death. It's quite a remarkable story. I don't really know that this person was very religious before, or maybe he was, but a weekend course and thinking about this person's humanity, he didn't label him a monster. He didn't cram him into a box, throw him out, throw the key away. He kept his heart open. So I think, I remind myself of this all the time when this afflicted mental state comes up. Maybe it happens to you too, where we see another person, we've labeled them arrogant, rude, careless, jerk, through and through, or any other negative label. And in doing that, we'll be never interested in knowing anything more about the person. And we'd be never curious to ask them things like, how are you feeling and thinking about the thousands of people who have died worldwide due to coronavirus? With that kind of mind, we would never ask, how are you feeling and thinking about the hundreds of thousands of people who are grieving the loss of loved ones due to the virus? And we wouldn't ask, what thoughts do you have about the thousands of children who are living with starvation every day on this planet? And then, of course, we wouldn't think to ask, because now that person is just a snapshot, right? Boom, frozen in time. We wouldn't ask, what are you feeling when you read about the ongoing police brutality and the harm that has been endured in this country by African American people? We wouldn't think to ask, what would you care to say to the families who have lost dear ones due to gun violence? You wouldn't ask the person, what would you care to say to George Floyd's family to convey your compassionate thoughts for their wrenching loss? And you wouldn't even think about being curious to know what the person would love to say, if he or she could meet with the doctors and nurses on the front lines who have and continue to risk their lives to help the very sick, the dying, and their families. We wouldn't think of any of those questions because the person's just a jerk. Boom, that's all they are. Nothing else. So let's catch that mind that wants to label and judge and stop it in its tracks and replace it with a mind that wants to understand others by having conversations, by having shared aspects of our lives that we share with each other. And I think it's that orientation that can ease us towards cultivating equanimity and the beautiful mind of bodhicitta. And most recently, on sharing the Dharma Day, I'll just remind us of this teaching, Venerable Children Unpacked, chapter 32, which is working with judgment and partiality. So maybe you saw that teaching that day, but I don't think it'll hear you to hear these words of advice again, which is, I think, Russell's part of the book. But it's very, very good. When we experience a lack of compassion towards someone, it is often because we've attached a label to him or her, with a corresponding emotion in tow. Seeing someone as that idiot that sabotaged my plans, we feel anger towards him or her. In such cases, our attention is focused on a very small sample of the other person's characteristics, like the quirky thing they do that irritates us. We may be completely unaware of this person as a complex being like us, with many other aspects to their life. Reducing the other person to a caricature, we make them into simply someone to hate. The danger in doing this is evident. It makes it much easier for us to behave harmfully or harbor grudges towards a person whom we fail to recognize their essential humanity. We need to find a way to see others as they really are, as complex, multifaceted beings who, just like us, want to be happy and not suffer. So there's many, many antidotes to this mind that wants to slap on labels that are so limiting. Reflecting on the disadvantages of this mental habit is one way. Remembering the advice we're getting repeatedly this year from vulnerable children to separate the person from their actions, that's so very important. And then go and review that teaching from July 12th on sharing the Dharma Day. Review the teachings on forgiveness. Join us for Shantideva's teachings every Thursday morning. And in doing all of these things, we can really transform the habit of negative thinking. So in closing, this is a short teaching on bodhicitta from venerable children. And here's another thing that we can do for the mind that wants to slap on negative labels. So when you praise others, which is a wonderful antidote, really take time to do it well. This applies not only to praising others to their face, but talking about them in a good way. And this, again, sometimes is really a training to do, to get yourself to talk nicely about other people. Sometimes, even when they are people that you don't particularly like, who have done something that is really good, to overcome that part of us that doesn't want to acknowledge that there isn't anything good about this person, it's really beneficial to use praise in order to train the mind. Even though a person may have done 10,000 things we don't like, of course, who's counting? We are. It's really, the point is that we point out their good qualities, we speak about them to their face and to others, and do this as a daily practice. Let's do that.